Good afternoon, everyone. Today we've got another video, and this time I'll be covering the XFX Radeon RX 6600 XT review that Donnie did on the website. Unfortunately, he couldn't make the video himself, so I'll be hosting the video and adding my own thoughts towards the end, but as he's traditionally the GPU editor, let's go over his intro. It's been quite a while since he's had a graphics card on the test bench, and for pretty good reason too. 2021 has been a heck of a ride for the graphics card market, with supplies being really low and prices and demand at an all-time high. However, recently there has been some hope for a return to normalcy, and today we're taking a look at arguably one of the most affordable graphics cards released in a long time, the XFX RX 6600 XT Speedster Merc 308. Now, I want to be very clear with you guys from the outset. This by no means is a cheap graphics card, and under normal circumstances, a $400 asking price for a card targeting 1080p would be just a very tough sell, to say the least. But these aren't normal circumstances that we're in, and with GDDR6 prices still firmly in the too damn high category,
the rent is too damn high.
it will likely be a bit longer before we see prices fully go back to anything approaching normal. Still, I'm going to do my best to evaluate today's offering as fairly as possible. So, taking a look at the table above, we can see that the XFX card has increased the clock speeds across the board, with base clocks raising up 11%, and game clocks getting a more modest bump of just 3%. Likewise, the boost clocks are only up at about 1%. For that, you get a price increase of about 11%, or $40 USD. Of course, MSRP is a four-letter word and is treated with less respect than Rodney Dangerfield, which is none. However, one of the reasons this review has been delayed is that we wanted to monitor the situation around the launch, and are happy to say that the 6600 XT, including the Merc 308, was fairly available at launch, with some retailers saying it was their biggest launch this year in terms of product on the shelf. Over in Chicago, the local Micro Center had at least 100 cards on launch day, with the majority of them priced between $380 and $400. That said, it doesn't seem like these cards were priced at or near MSRP were being offered at somewhat of a promotional price at launch, and buyers should expect cards coming in stock at this point to be priced closer to about $450. And while that's unfortunate, it's just the reality of the market that we're in today. And now, a word from our sponsor. So, since the price of hardware has been skyrocketing, you just might be looking for a way to save some money on your build. Our sponsor today, cdkeyoffers.com, has a way to solve that. You can use code ADORE, A-D-O-R-E, to pick up a Windows 10 key, or some of the other products they sell, like game keys and Microsoft Office. After you order the key, give it a bit and it'll be delivered almost instantly. Finally, that pesky Windows is not activated watermark is gone, and voila, you can put on whatever wallpaper you want. Just make sure you copy and paste the code. Give it a minute or so to activate the key, and once it's done, you should be good to go. That's, again, our sponsor today, cdkeyoffers.com. Remember, if you want to save 20%, use code ADORE, A-D-O-R-E. Looking over and taking a look at the card itself, we can see that it sports a triple fan cooling solution with a 2.5 slot design. This may seem like overkill for a card that draws just about 160 watts, but the triple 80mm fans delivered a cool and relatively quiet experience during our testing. Those fans feature a 9-blade design which pushes air through the respectably sized all-aluminum heatsink, and this features 4 6mm nickel-plated copper heat pipes. These, which are connected to a large nickel-plated copper cold plate that also makes contact with both the GPU and the memory. Additionally, this card features an all-aluminum backplate with pass-through cooling that increases the card's rigidity without sacrificing cooling performance. Additionally, this card features an LED-lit Radeon RX 6600 XT logo on the side, which is fairly subtle compared to most RGB lighting affairs that you'll find on many premium graphics cards, and both of us quite like it. The card measures at just under 10 inches long, 4.5 inches wide, and about 2 inches thick. Around back you have 3 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, which feature display stream compression, as well as a single HDMI 2.0 port. Powering this card is a single 8-pin PCIe connector, which is connected to an 8+2 phase power delivery, which features a full digital PWM. Now, moving on to the GPU test suite, Donnie has updated his testing methodology and is now using CapFrame X. He has also updated his test bench, now using a 5th generation Ryzen system, with components supplied by ASRock, Team Group, Deepcool, ASUS, Nixus, and Phantex's brand Metalligear. For the CPU, he used a Ryzen 9 5900X, an ASRock X570 Taichi Razor Edition, as well as a 32GB kit of Team Group's T-Force Extreme ARGB DDR4 3600 32GB CL14 memory, a Team Group Cardia Zero Z440 1TB Gen 4 SSD, and a Team Group T-Force Delta Max 1TB SSD. He also used a Deepcool Castle 360 EX RGB AIO side of Phantex's brand Metalligear's Neo Cube case. This system is powered by an Asus ROG Thor 850-watt power supply, and the monitor used is a Nixus Edge 3440 by 1440p monitor. So Donnie has compared the 6600 XT to our big boy Radeon 6800 XT. Also keep in mind for all tests, SAM is enabled. Okay, so let's move on now to the overclock. Donnie was able to overclock this card with a performance target of a minimum frequency of 2400 MHz and a max of 2800 MHz on the core, and a maximum memory frequency of 2250 with a power limit at 120%. Now, it's important to remember that the settings here are targets, and they do not guarantee you will achieve these numbers exactly. That said, we were able to validate that these settings function correctly and did improve clock speeds overall. Okay, so now on the screen you will see the clock speeds for these cards, the temperatures, and power draw of the different configurations of the 6600 XT and the Radeon 6800 XT reference edition. Okay, so now on for the games. For Forza Horizon 4, we've used the built-in benchmarking utility at ultra settings. Taking a quick glance, we see that the 6800 XT is only about 10% faster at 1080p on average, though this gap widens a bit at 1440p as it seems the 6800 XT was being pretty GPU bottlenecked. Moving on to Gears 5, we test using the game's built-in benchmarking utility as well as testing it at ultra settings with VRS off. At 1080p, we see an almost 50% performance gap between the 6800 XT, though a respectable 100 FPS in the game's benchmark from our budget card, and a gap of 122 to 73 FPS on the averages at 1440p, to 91 and 57 on the 99th percentiles. Taking a look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla, he also tested using the game's in-game benchmarking utility on the Ultra preset. The 6600 XT sees a nice performance jump of under 10% in the averages and about 7% in the 99th percentiles. At 1440p, though, this overclock doesn't help as much. However, it does keep closer to that 60 FPS number you might be looking for, and the 6800 XT just demolishes it, as a card that is much more expensive should. In the Watch Dogs Legion test, we use the built-in benchmark with ultra settings, SMAA on, DXR off, and in DX12. The OC doesn't seem to help it too much, however it does push a respectable 75 FPS on average, and sticks above that 60 FPS number on the stock and overclock configuration. The 6800 XT though just makes it look bad. At 1440p you would definitely want to drop down to medium or high, especially since this card isn't really aimed at 1440p to begin with. That 128-bit bus has to get you somewhere. Okay, so now we're going to swap over to Horizon Zero Dawn, which was tested using the in-game benchmarking utility at ultimate quality settings. So we see the 6800 XT at almost 50% faster once again at 1080p, even though the 6600 XT performs well, getting about 100 FPS on average here, though that OC doesn't seem to help a whole lot at 1080p. Switching over to 1440p, we can see the OC becoming a bit more helpful, though it still trails behind the 6800 XT pretty meaningfully. Okay, now moving on to Doom Eternal. We have tested the game with a 60-second run on the Hell on Earth mission at Nightmare settings at 1080p with DXR off and VRS off. Doom Eternal seems to really stress this card, Nightmare mode specifically, with the 6800 XT being over twice as fast than our 6600 XT, on average and even faster in the 99th percentiles. Though this OC helps quite a bit there. The 1440p numbers are pretty staggering as well, and to anyone playing this game, you might want to drop these settings to something like Ultra if you plan on really playing this game. Next, we have Metro Exodus. We test using the in-game benchmark at Ultra settings with DXR off. So we can see about a 6 FPS gain from OCing this card at 1080p, and 4 FPS in the 99th percentiles. Oddly enough, the FPS numbers are the exact same at 1440p. Okay, so now we're going to use Dirt 5. We test this game using the built-in benchmarking utility with the Ultra preset and DXR off. Here we see about a 50% gap again between the 6600 XT and 6800 XT. 1440p isn't all that much better either. For Hitman 3, we test using the in-game benchmarking utility at Ultra settings with simulation quality at best. And this time we see a closer gap at 1080p of about only 20% and very similar 99th percentiles. This is likely due to simulation quality being set to best. At 1440p, we can see the overclock configuration keeping very close to the 6800 XT as well. Okay, so now we're going to move on to one of the more popular multiplayer titles in our test suite. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the in-game benchmark at Ultra settings with SSBC Plus on and FXAA. So you can see the Merc card gets over 300 FPS on average and just under 200 FPS on Ultra settings. Its 1080p numbers are even better, and they would be about what you'd hope for a game this old. Okay, for Resident Evil Village, we tested for 60 seconds in the graveyard area in the village. Settings are set to max with DXR off, VRS off, and FCAS off. Overclocking had a decent uplift in performance here, though more so at 1440p. Overall, this performance is quite impressive, even if the 6600 XT is about twice as fast. For Cyberpunk, we've tested at Ultra settings during the car chase sequence during the rescue mission early on in the game. Here at 1080p, we can see the 6600 XT fail to get about 60 FPS on the 99th percentiles, and this overclock doesn't seem to help much. At 1440p, we see more of the same, and the 6800 XT is just leaps and bounds better. Finally, for all the games tested, we have Control. This game is tested during the objective power area for about 60 seconds. The game is tested at high settings with Ultra textures, DXR off, and MSAA at ×4 in DX12. We can see this card perform pretty well, overclocked, even though it's still trailing by double to the 6800 XT. Overall, this card does do a pretty good job of playing this game if you're just looking to try to get your 60 FPS out of it. If you want the full conclusion to Donnie's review, check the website, but I'm going to drive this main point home. The 6600 XT did a fairly decent job of pushing playable frame rates at 1440p after the memory is pushed to about 18 gigs per second. The card also scaled well with OC settings, getting a performance uplift of about 7% at 1080p and 9% at 1440p. So we were firmly in the camp of the 5700 XT was good for 1440p camp a few years ago, and today my thoughts on this are somewhat similar, even though the smaller bus makes it somewhat of a bigger issue for these cards. We would also recommend that you try to OC your card because overclocking with AMD software is a pretty painless experience now. And as for the 6600 XT versus NVIDIA, Donnie had no NVIDIA cards available at the time of testing, but us looking at other reviews and some testing I did on my own, this card sits somewhere between the 3060 and the 3060 Ti in performance depending on the title, though I'd argue it's a much better value. Why, you might ask yourself, the 3060 Ti is only $400 and the 3060 is only $330 after all. Well, those cards haven't seen those prices since launch. I would know, I tried to buy these cards several times. The best I've seen a 3060 Ti priced was $479.99, and most of them end up sitting somewhere between $540 and $649. And as for the 3060s, well, I haven't seen one under $399 since a few weeks after launch, with some of them hitting just under $629. That 12 gigs of VRAM really ended up hurting NVIDIA on the 3060. The best priced card I've regularly seen in stock is the EVGA XC 3060 sitting at just about $400. So at best, AMD street prices puts it up against the 3060 and occasionally the 3060 Ti, although those cards generally are in the upper price point of about $550. Prices in other markets like Europe and South America are a whole different story, so in those markets, those of you watching should figure out your own value ratio due to different costs in different markets. I've also had some time to spend with this card for a little while, and I, like Donnie, am quite impressed by it. I'll have some of my own testing with these cards in the next few weeks, after I get some content out, and I'll say in current market conditions, paying under $500 for this card is a pretty acceptable price, and at the $419 price point that it's supposed to be continuing to be sold at, it's really good. Under normal circumstances, though, this card should be at least about $100 cheaper, but as you've probably figured out by now, this is anything but normal conditions, and it provides a whole lot more value than the 6700 XT I reviewed last month. I also think this card is sort of an ideal premium 1080p card where you can get 1080p ultra settings in just about every game we've tested, while getting 60 FPS or more, and still being able to put settings to low and push high frame rates in more competitive titles like Rainbow Six Siege. Heck, we got 300 FPS at 1440p on the ultra settings there. But this 128-bit bus really hurt this card at higher resolutions. Though, if you can handle it, you can back off a bit on the settings and get okay performance at 1440p. This isn't necessarily a premium card, but it can get the job done if you're not really picky. But now onto the XFX card itself. The Quick model is quite similar to this one in all but some cosmetic details and should be retailing for about $399, although I see it available at B&H for $479.99, which is unfortunate. This might be a pretty good option if you're not looking to miss out on some of the cosmetic features, although I wouldn't be surprised if I see more of these cards sitting at around $450 in the coming weeks. But keep in mind that pricing on all AIB cards seems to be a bit wonky depending on the retailers themselves and the middlemen that end up selling these cards wholesale to people like B&H, Newegg, and Amazon. Although I think our days of incredibly high-priced GPUs are starting to come closer to the end. So with that, this was our video today. Let us know what you think down in the comments. And if you're interested in buying one of these cards, or if you're waiting to buy some old miner cards that you can get for really cut down prices. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Please like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and check out our Patreon. Thanks a lot, and have a great week.